In California, the city of San Francisco is gearing up for a major diplomatic summit as global leaders will gather to attend the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum known as APEC. The 30th APEC summit may witness a rare meeting between U.S. President Joe Biden and China's Xi Jinping. And according to the White House, U.S. President Joe Biden will push China to reestablish military ties this week. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that Biden will seek to advance the ball with Xi on military ties. Biden considers military ties with China as his top agenda item. However, Jake Sullivan declined to provide any further details. The meeting will be only their second in-person meeting since President Biden took office. Beijing, on the other hand, says that both Biden and Xi will be discussing issues of strategic interest and will be engaging in a dialogue on global peace. The relationship between Washington and Beijing has been on a constant decline. Earlier, China was accused of sending a spy balloon into U.S. airspace, which had sparked concerns that important information was being scooped up by Beijing. Later, the U.S. had sent its high-level diplomats to Taiwan, despite China's warning. It started with U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's trip to Taiwan last year, and in response to that visit to Taipei, Beijing launched joint military exercises around the island and suspended or canceled 8 official military dialogues and cooperation channels with the United States. The other thing in focus will be the chip war between U.S. and China. The Biden administration imposed a sweeping ban on China's access to U.S. advanced semiconductors. APEC accounts for 62% of global GDP and almost half of global trade. APEC operations on the basis of non-binding commitments, and decisions are reached by agreements and deals, which are undertaken on a voluntary basis. San Francisco is showcasing its capacity to host the 30th APEC summit. There is visible police presence as fences are being put up for the conference. But along with the summit preparation, protests equally are expected to make headlines. Activists are planning to hold protest marches against abnormal corporate profits, environmental abuses, poor working conditions, and the Israel-Hamas war in downtown San Francisco. All right, a lot to talk about, and for more on this, we are being joined by James Schwemlin, former U.S. State Department official. He's joining us live from Washington, D.C. James, thank you so much for joining us on WION. Do you think that there is a reason to be optimistic regarding this meeting between Xi Jinping and President Biden? Can we expect any significant breakthroughs between the two sides?
Well, Susan, it's Monday morning in Washington, so there's always reason to be optimistic. But I think this meeting is unlikely to produce anything, earth-shattering, which frankly is a good thing. The point here, and the point of the President Biden and President Xi meeting, is to try to return to a kind of working normal between the two sides. We're still in the early stages of what will be a long-term competition between the U.S. and China that will deepen. But practices like not engaging and not talking between the two armed forces, practices like refusing, high-level visits and not picking up the phone when called to diffuse a crisis, are alarming and then kind of pose a risk to escalation. So I think the goal here is for there not to be big waves, but for things to settle down.
And the summit is taking place under the cloud of 2 active wars, one in the Middle East and another one in Europe. We learned during the weekend that President Biden may be asking Xi Jinping for help to solve the Israel-Hamas conflict. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, and I think it is important to point out that, neither the war in Ukraine, which Russia started, nor the, war in the Middle East, which Hamas started, actually involve U.S. or China as combatants at this point in time. These are conflicts that we're both, engaged in various ways. In the U.S. case, in supporting both the government of Ukraine and the government of Israel. But we are not actively in conflict with China in these areas. Again, I think in the case of Ukraine, China has chosen to back up Russia in many ways, but it has not gone necessarily yet as far as Russia might wish it to go. It has not gone so far as to prop up or help the Chinese economy grow. It's not helped equip Russian forces as to the extent that China possibly could. And in that regard, I would expect the U.S. to continue to push the Chinese not to prop up Putin and his aggression in Ukraine. And in Israel, I'm not sure that there's a diplomatic solution that China could broker, but China, as both a permanent member of the Security Council and as a global power, certainly has a role at the table and a role to play in backing any de-escalation of this crisis. They have made important inroads in the Middle East, alongside in growing relations both with Saudi Arabia and with Iran, including with a high-level meeting that they brokered last year, or earlier this year, rather. And China has a role to play in ensuring and backing a de-escalation, but I'm not sure it will have a role to play in brokering that de-escalation up front.
All right, James Schwemlin, thank you so much for joining us from Washington, D.C., James, and I look forward to speaking to you again very soon.
Thanks, Susan.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.